Hello, welcome to the SUPER-SMP Phase 2 Part 2 video. If you haven't seen the previous ones, I would 100% recommend that you watch those for context. I'm going to keep this short since it technically is just the second part of a previous video. But yeah, so if you did enjoy those and enjoyed this, I'm sure you'll love this the most out of anything. That said though, I do think that this part of the second phase has some of the best writing thus far, so thank you for enjoying. Anyway, now that you've 100% caught up on everything before this, let's get into the video. Act 1. Powerless. So after being arrested and having the symbiote removed from her, Eris is put into a cell with her new cellmate. The redhead with the creepy smile introduces herself as Cassidy, and Eris decides to go to sleep. The next day, she wakes up and gets dragged by the guards to lunch with Cassidy, who makes jokes at the guards' expense. Despite not being asked, Cassidy has decided to show Eris the ropes of the prison. And so while eating lunch, Cassidy explains the rules of the prison. The most important rule being rule number 5. Newbies get beat up by the strongest in the room. The scene then cuts to Riley swinging around the city and thinking about the Civil War. And the next scene is kind of a combination of Eris fighting people in the prison and Riley flashing back to the fight between him and Eris. As in the Civil War, the two were pitted against each other. The scene then shows Eris beating the strongest guy in the prison, and the screen goes black before the next scene. Riley's knocked out of his flashback when he sees Rhino and the Vulture robbing a bank and webs up Vulture before S.H.I.E.L.D. gets there and stops Rhino. Riley then makes a comment about how ever since S.H.I.E.L.D. started getting more and more involved in the city, he hasn't been getting much action as a hero. And he also wishes as much because ever since those exact same mandates by the government, S.H.I.E.L.D. has not only been more active in the city, but more cruel towards heroes in the city who get in their way whatsoever. And if they do so much as talk back a little too much, they get in trouble with a higher threat of being accused of being a criminal, and also thereby getting no trial as a hero and just going to prison because of their meta abilities. And even though the government spent millions of dollars fixing the raft, they're no longer using it and just putting everyone in the same prisons, just with higher armed guards. Though of course the heroes aren't with low caliber criminals like thieves, more like murderers or psychopaths. Though by heroes I really mean superpowered individuals. S.H.I.E.L.D. then orders him to come with them, and he kinda has to, where he meets the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Eddie Brock. At first he's confused about Nick Fury, but Brock cuts him off before he can ask any questions. Eddie talks to Riley about how he's too good of a hero to be used in the cities for minor supervillainy, and that not only do they have a new mission for him, but they also have a new suit to help him out. Eddie walks over to a nearby table and grabs a box and opens it, revealing a white goo. After the fight, Eris was put into solitary confinement, and Cassidy sneaks in and breaks Eris out, and they begin talking. Cassidy decides to overshare a little and explain why she's in prison. When she was younger, she killed her grandmother, her mother, and their family dog. All of this after her mother killed her father, her grandmother housed them after her mom got a verdict of innocent, and her grandmother abused her and her mother, who was also a neglectful parent. And her mother got a dog and only really paid attention to that dog, who the grandmother also abused. She killed them both after a hard beating with a baseball bat from her grandmother. Though a little shocked by this sudden expulsion of information, Eris tries to act cool about things because Cassidy did kind of have a good reason, and Cassidy's own admission, it was an overreaction, and she's been working closely with a therapist. Plus, Cass was helping her get to the symbiote and escape. Of course, Cass didn't know that it was the symbiote that she was helping get, just generally bringing Eris to her thing so that she could leave. Cassie and Eris get to some sort of detainment lab and get the symbiote, also starting a riot to help cause chaos so that it was easier to escape. And while they were leaving the detainment lab, Cassie also wrecked the place and threw chemicals on the floor and dripped certain random colors all over the ground. A variety of rainbow. Just a bunch of possibly dangerous chemicals all over the floor. She also expressed concern because knocking over all the glass seemed to make her start bleeding, and also she seems to have maybe gotten a few too many chemicals on her body. Cass, surprised by the reveal that the person she's been helping is a hero, ultimately says that it's fine and should be. The two run out into the courtyard, filled with chaos, unbelievable amount of people fighting. And just as Eris starts creating a web and tries to grab Cassidy, she turns around to see that Cassidy has been grabbed by a She's about to web for Cass, but Cass shakes her head no, knowing that it will only create more trouble and prevent even one of them from escaping. Eris recognizes this and just swings out to the prison. Act 2. Super. The scene starts and shows Riley beginning to fight the Beetle, and after throwing Beetle through a building, he realizes the immense power the new symbiote has given him, and at first he doesn't notice the harm he caused to Beetle. But then he realizes that Beetle is knocked out. He goes to make sure that she's okay and calls S.H.I.E.L.D. and tells himself that he's got to make sure he doesn't overuse this massive power-up and accidentally hurt someone for real. Even later while patrolling, he fights Sandman and a Rhino again, but he hits so strong that he cracks Rhino's suit. Riley then decides that he's he's kind of tired of being a hero at the moment, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to interrupt him or something anyway, and so he decided to go back to Liz's lab and try to work. However, all this does is start an argument between the two, and Riley gets angry and Liz kicks him out. The camera then flips to show that Harry has been there the whole time in the shadows, and he tells Liv that he wasn't lying about Riley being a jerk, but now, due to the security camera that Harry had installed outside, he actually had proof to prove it to Liv that Riley was the Scarlet Spider. Liv begins to cry that one of her close friends killed her father, and Harry holds her in his arms as she sobs. Then, as Riley crawls through the window into his house, he sees that there is an unread message on his phone. For a long time, the police never got a true look at the footage that night after Riley completed his wrestling match and Uncle Ben was killed. But Police Chief Stacy informed Riley that they had found the footage, and not only was it not the person they suspected who Riley had found and beat the shit out of, only to realize that it was wrong, but Riley also realized from this call that the person who killed his father was Anita Schultz, the Shocker, someone he had battled many times before, someone he could have gotten revenge on this whole time, and yet he didn't know. At first he goes to reach for his suit, but as the white ooze crawls over his hand and creates his glove, he realizes he doesn't need to. The mask covers his face and the red eyes over his. He jumps out of his window and swings to find Shocker. Riley eventually finds Shocker in a warehouse and surprises her. She already has her gauntlets on, but takes a moment to pull on her mask as Riley hits her in the face, and she shoots across the room. She uses the gauntlets to shoot blasts at Riley, which though they do irritate the symbiote, they don't hit him directly, so it doesn't do nearly as much damage as it could. He flies across the room, swinging and crawling, and beating Anita, ripping her suit to shreds. Shocker begins to run, darting through stairways and alleys, and trying to escape the Scarlet Spider. Riley taunts and screams at Shocker, saying, "Get back here, Shocker! Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth!" Riley finally catches up to Anita and finally pins her down for a moment. Luckily, though, she gets a shock on him and it separates the symbiote from his body for a moment. Luckily, she immediately ran away and didn't get a good look at his face, but Riley keels over in anguish and pain for a moment. Just enough time for him to partially, but not completely, come to his senses. He thinks, what was I doing? But as the symbiote reconnects, he only seems to lose interest in what he was doing and not see why it happened. The next scene opens with Alex figuring she can't swing all the way over to Stark Island by herself and that she'll probably have to sneak onto a boat or a plane or something. Though she knows she'll have to avoid being found out and swings around the city before seeing a white suit swinging and saying, "Is that right?" just as Riley swings over and punches her in the face. Not only does the physical pain of the punch hurt, but also this strange burning sensation that the symbiote is feeling causes both of them to be in pain. The part of the face where they were hit feels dry, and it seems to come off, as though it is now separate and seems dead. What the hell? Eris says. This suit is called V&M 5.0, Riley begins. Although for all intents and purposes, just think of it as anti-venom. Eris webs away and the two start a chase. Eris calls Riley out on clearly being angrier and more violent, and she asks why he's acting like this. Eris also makes a comment about how she doesn't think Riley looks good in those clothes and they don't look like they fit him. Riley asks what she's talking about and Eris explains, symbiotes lower your inhibitions, but if it lowers the wrong inhibitions, it could have a terrible result on the person's actions. Riley asks Eris how she knows this, and after hitting Riley with a giant metal bar, she says, "A bit of intuition based on my own experience and a weird screen I found in the prison while getting my suit back." Riley on the ground just kind of lays there for a moment, and as Eris is about to leave, he asks, "Answer honestly, did you kill him?" Eris stands there and turns around her head to look at her friend. No, she then swings off. Eris swings across the city and takes a break atop a building. She then notices the local bank has alarms going off and decides, since she's there, even though she's not too happy with the government, she might as well try to help out. Eris crawls in and looks around to try to find who the perpetrator is. Then a voice speaks up from behind him. "Listen, buddy, this bank's already being robbed by someone in black." Venom turns around to see Black Cat. "I'm not here to rob the bank." "Well, forgive me for assuming. Didn't you kill the president?" "I haven't killed anybody." "No reason to be so angry, honey. You are literally robbing a bank. You are in no place to judge me." Right, because those are on the same level." Ugh. Venom tries to web her up, but she dodges the attack and tries to make her escape. Venom and Black Cat chase each other around the city until the police eventually find the two. Black Cat drags Venom into hiding, and the two hide from the police. Venom protests that she didn't need any help, and Black Cat laughs and then makes her escape. Venom decides to repay her favor and stop chasing her, although she will research her more once he gets to Stark Island. Riley wakes up the next morning still aching from the fight last night and also just having a general headache, and he puts on his suit and looks at the symbiote. And despite telling himself that he shouldn't wear it, remembering Alex's word, he still puts it on and swings around the city, and eventually gets in a fight with Liv, who is now wearing the superior octopus suit. She loudly proclaims her desire to kill Riley and get revenge for her father. Liv beats Riley with her improved octopus tentacles and screams, "You're on a war path, going to kill everyone in your path just because someone killed your Uncle Ben." This makes Riley mad as all hell, and he snaps one of Liv's robotic arms like it's a twig. Both of them were shocked by this, and Liv uses her remaining arms to run away while talking about how she miscalculated, and Riley looks at himself through the nearest window, looking at his reflection and seeing someone else other than himself. Riley swings around the city, reflecting on the fact that Liv obviously knows his identity now, but also that he could have killed her if he had gone for her and not one of the tentacles. He then nearby sees a church, and he knows what he has to do. Though a nagging feeling tells him not to, he crawls up the tower and starts beating the bell with his strength, causing the symbiote to flail off of his body. He beats the bell and beats the bell until it nearly breaks, but the symbiote is off of him. Act 3. Villainous. This act once again shows Riley tearing off the suit, and he decides to confront the man who gave it to him, Eddie Brock of S.H.I.E.L.D. Eddie essentially spiels that the government has basically been corrupt, and they want to tear apart the Avengers, and there's no greater way than killing Venom, because since Venom's allegations tore apart the group, Venom's death would do that to unbelievable magnitudes. And so they gave one person who was already on par with Venom in strength a power-up that is directly made to take down Venom. Eddie then also explains that since the symbiote bonded with Riley for so long, it actually started picking up on more of his traits. And since it wasn't a first-generation symbiote that was directly tested on the spiders that gave Riley his powers like Venom, it would make whoever wore the symbiote next 10 times more powerful than either of them. Eddie then promptly pulls out a device and wears the symbiote, which crawls over to him from behind Riley. At first, the white suit forms very similarly to how it formed on Riley's body, but then it starts to take a different form as it changes from Riley's suit pattern to a newer one, more reflective of its natural state. The black parts of the suits cover the red in the eyes, and most of the suit's black parts fade to a white, with a giant black spider symbol crawling over the suit, more similarly to Venom than the Scarlet Spider. Eddie then throws Riley through a wall and loudly proclaims,
"We are anti-Venom, and you are going to die."
Riley then does as any rational person would in this situation and jumps out of the helicarrier. Due to his web wings, this isn't really much of an issue for him as he can glide down, but it is an issue for him that anti-Venom just jumped off the helicarrier as well, and doesn't seem too scared about hitting her. Riley could already fall from massive heights without taking much damage, and so of course the 10 times stronger anti-Venom could fall all the way from the helicarrier without taking any himself. Riley dives as far as he can before activating his web wings to glide on down. Anti-Venom lands in front of him on top of a building, the roof of the building quaking and cracking as Anti-Venom hits it. A long, red, monstrous tongue emits from his maw as he screams a monstrous sound at Riley. Riley tries to swing away, but his leg is grabbed by the hulking beast, who throws him back into the roof. Venom was swinging around the city at the time, trying to get to the boat that she knew would be disembarking that day, but she saw Riley being beat up by Anti-Venom and assumed that he wasn't doing too hot. So even though she knew the risks of fighting Anti-Venom, her and the symbiote agreed to swing over and help their friend. And so right before Anti-Venom's arm turns into a giant blade to stab through Riley's chest, Venom webs his arm to the ground and grabs Riley before jumping off of the building. As the two swing, they separate into two separate swingers, and Riley explains the situation. Eris groans and said, "I told you so," and Riley kindly tells her to shut up for the time being while they deal with the situation. They hear Anti-Venom scream from the distance, and they hear him jump from building to building. Alex then calmly suggests that maybe Anti-Venom hasn't gotten a hang of swinging yet, and so he's jumping from building to building, making him far slower than the two of them. Riley concurs, and then they come up with a plan. Venom cannot touch Anti-Venom, so she's going to have to be a distance fighter, shooting webs from the distance to help Riley out, while he deals most of the physical damage to the creature. And so, as Anti-Venom nearly hits them with a mighty swing, the two prepare to enact their plan. A mighty battle ensues, with the two rapidly swinging around the building to try to avoid Anti-Venom, as he is naturally slower than either of them, and Riley getting a good few hits in on him. But as Anti-Venom pins Riley to the ground, Eris has no idea what to do. If she touches him, she'll die, and if she doesn't touch him, Riley's gonna die. She then comes up with a plan. She crawls to the side of the building, causing Anti-Venom to taunt Riley about his friend not caring about him, and she calmly rips out wires out of the power box on the building and just kinda chucks them over at Anti-Venom. And just as the symbiote curls back over Brock, she webs the gauntlet on his hand and webs Brock out of the way as she uses the gauntlet to trap Anti-Venom inside of it. Riley then, with his intelligence, fixes the wires in the power box, and the two just kind of put Anti-Venom in there and leave Brock on the side of a random building as he's passed out, and luckily not dead. Riley compliments Venom's perfect timing, and they simply say, "Better him than you," and the two share a laugh together before they find a random boat to steal, and then promptly use to boat all the way over to Stark Island. And then the post-credit scene of this film is Riley and Alex riding across the ocean in their stolen motorboat, as Willow intercepts the two, basically flying a plane into the ocean and jumping out of it onto their boat. And then Willow says, "Since Riley's betrayed the government, they've assigned me a task to remove the both of you, and they've given me the title of Spider Slayer." The next two plots are fairly simple, so I'm just gonna run through one after the other. The next one is called Spider Slayer, and basically Willow fights Alex and Riley on the boat. Willow loses, but like during the fight they like back and forth, and Willow explains her ideals of like, hey, the government has to be in the right? They are the ones in charge. Well, Alex is like, clearly not. I'm innocent. They're screwy. I didn't even get a trial. And Riley shares his opinion of like, maybe we should question the government a little. It's been kind of fucky recently. Maybe we shouldn't just blindly assume that everything going on in the country is correct all the time, and look at some things through a different lens, despite, whether or not we do or do not like the country, Maybe we should, like, have a more complex view about things. And the post-credits of that would lead into the next one somehow. And so the next one is called Black Panther White Wolf. Long story short, T'Challa's brother, who is albino, decides to be a dickwad and try to take over the country. T'Challa obviously stops him. The reason I shotgunned that one is because, like, it's not the best written thing. I would want to rework some things if I were to say it in detail, but long story short, T'Challa wins. And then the post-credit scene of White Wolf shows the planet Vormir, to where someone in gold-plated armor walks up to a mountain and forces a father, some sort of alien, to throw his daughter down the hole while laughing. As the Soul Stone appears to the father, Hera kills him and takes the Soul Stone for herself, putting on her helmet, and then using the power of the Soul Stone to reach across the universe to the holder of the Space Stone, Victor Von Doom, and controlling his body to use the Space Stone to bring Hera to Earth, at which point she forces him to hand her the Space Stone, and then she leaves. Avengers, end of the world. The scene begins as Grace is walking through the city with Kenzie, describing the first Avengers events when suddenly aliens start to invade Earth. The sisters then put on their suits as Grace puts her shield on her left arm and the alien troops begin to attack them. Luckily, just as they start to get overpowered, Willow swings by and starts helping them out. Willow grabs the two and webs them up to the top of the building, and Grace introduces her sister to her apprentice. Willow complains about her suit being damp and how aliens are invading the damn planet. Willow tries asking Grace what's going on, but they know the exact same amount. And so Grace has them run across buildings, and eventually Grace decides obeying S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't really matter when the world could end because of an alien invasion, and dictates the group will go to New Asgard. Willow protests, but Grace basically just tells her to shut up. The screen then cuts to Zack and Abby battling aliens when Grace and her crew show up. Zack initially scowls as Grace says that she needs their help, and Zack tells how they fought against his will, and how he won't follow a dishonorable captain. Grace tells Zack it's either they work together, regardless of the leader, or the world ends. Zack can clearly tell she's right based on the alien invasion, and after a little nudging from Abby, he agrees to work together. The group gets into a fighting position, and as they fight, a wizard appears in front of them. Dr. Stephen Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme, then turns all of the aliens nearby into babies and approaches the group. Willow then says, "Holy shit, a wizard!" The Sorcerer Supreme then begins to explain the situation. An evil woman named Hera has decided to collect all of the Infinity Stones. What she will do with this power? Kill half of all the life in the universe. Why does she want to do this? Simply because she wants to, and simply because she thinks she is worthy of doing so. Strange then explains that she already has multiple of the stones, and that if they are to win, the Avengers are going to need to all work together. At first, Willow has an angry look, but Grace nudges her to be a little more willing to accept the idea. Grace then says that she'd be willing to do whatever it takes to help the Earth, and the rest of the universe it seems. The Doctor says thank you, and then promptly tells them that the 5 of them need to go to the raft. That's because the Mind Stone is kept there, and they essentially need to make sure that Hera isn't able to get it, or at least slow her down an extreme amount. The captain says alright, and the group then begins to run the opposite direction as the Doctor, who goes in the opposite direction as them. Willow then tells Grace that she's going to follow the Doctor to make sure that he is following his word and that he is not trying to trick them in some way. And before Grace can protest, Willow's already jumping off and swimming into the distance. The scene then cuts to see Doctor Strange flying down to Stark Island and finds Douglas Stark wearing the Hulkbuster Mark II, Riley, and Alex all fighting aliens in the city. The Doctor then explains the situation to them along with what Grace's group is doing. As the Doctor explains that, Willow lands on the island in front of the others. Willow and the 3 Avengers are about to fight, but the Doctor explains to them that once again they need to work together to ensure the safety of the entire friggin' world. And the Doctor then explains to Willow that if she doesn't comply, the Doctor will kill her himself. And so the group agrees and gets on a spaceship to go to the planet Nowhere. They of course have to fight aliens to even get on the rocket, but they eventually do get into space, and the ship flies into a Doctor Strange portal and heads straight towards Nowhere. The scene then cuts once again to the captains and the Thors landing on the raft. They see Hera's ships approaching the island, and Grace asks Thor what they should do. Thor suggests a lightning attack on top of the ship while the humans take the stone, and once they get out, Abby will cease the attack and fly down to grab the stone. Grace agrees, and then the Thors fly up while her and Kenzie run into the raft and split up down the hallways, as the raft is a winding maze. This is to prevent criminals from escaping, although it doesn't exactly help the heroes in this situation. Zack and Abby then fly up into the ships above and begin blasting them with lightning. As Zack flies into the ship to blast it again, a blue portal opens, causing Zack to hit his head, slamming into an enclosed room in the ship made of pure netherite. Wow, look at me throwing in a little Minecraft lore in the Minecraft server. Amazing writing, truly. Hera then laughs and says, "And as Guardian? I didn't know rare species were on this planet. It seems that I'm eating well tonight." Zack then let out a rage-filled scowl. He then said, "You'll never get a chance to see the rest of my people," before swinging towards Hera, who dodges his attacks and uses the Space Stone to slam him down into Newport City. Also, I feel we need to preface that Newport City is the city on Stark Island, by the way. Zack gets up and flies at Hera, who creates another portal to teleport Zack straight into the Arctic. Zack spins around and looks for Hera before she appears and hits him, punching his soul right out of his body, and knocks him through a mountain, and then through another portal into the main city, this being the one that things like the first Avengers take place in. The server's been 2 years in the making, and I still haven't figured out a name for it. It's great. Zack's soul then follows his body through the portal and re-enters his own form, summoning Stormbreaker through himself as Hera appears behind him and slams him through another portal down into the ocean near the raft. Abby, in a moment of fear and adrenaline, flies into the ocean to save her boyfriend. Her ships then use this opportunity to approach faster. Grace gets to the core of the raft and uses her comms to talk to Kenzie. It seems to be the ship's power source. What do I do? If we take it out, all these criminals will go free, but we also can stop whoever from getting it. Grace doesn't get the chance to choose, however, when we hear a portal sound and also see Hera slam through the walls into the room. Grace picks up the stone quickly and starts running as Hera uses portals to slowly catch up to her. Hera uses the Space Stone to create a portal under Grace, causing Grace to fall down into the top of the raft. Hera portals to the roof herself as Grace gets up, pained but not hurt due to her healing factor. "Give it to me," Hera says to the captain. Grace then says, "I can do this all day," as Hera runs at her. Grace blocks her hit with her shield, causing Hera to say, "Vibranium exists in this world." Noted. Hera then teleports Grace into a loop, disorienting her. Grace then drops the stone after passing out. Kenzie hurries to the roof and quickly grabs the stone to save it from being captured by Hera, and uses her blaze to stab into Hera. Hera yells in pain and uses the Soul Stone on Kenzie, before picking up the stone and putting it into her suit before teleporting off to Nowhere, the planet. Kenzie's soul re-enters her body as Grace wakes up and the Thors fly out of the water onto the top of the raft. Grace then says, "I'd argue with your choices, but I couldn't deal with her any better, so I can't talk." Abby then says, "And we need to leave so we aren't in a 50 versus 4 fight." Zack then says, "Well, where are we gonna go?" Kenzie says, "She can get hurt by vibranium. If we go to Wakanda, we can both get more to hurt her and team up with T'Challa." Zack interrupts and asks, "Who?" Grace then explains that he's the king of Wakanda, and that those two are probably going to get along in that regard considering they're both kings. Grace and Kenzie are also friends with T'Challa, so if they go, they can team up with him to get an upper hand on Hera. Abby then asks, "Alright, so which direction do we fly?" Kenzie says, "Africa's south from here, I believe." The Spiders and Iron Man land on the planet Nowhere with Doctor Strange. The Doctor says Hera will be coming to Nowhere soon and that they need to prepare. Douglas Stark asks him why he knows so much about Hera, and the Doctor explains, "Well, to explain this I have to go back. The sorcerers were a group started long ago. It's not as much magic as unlocking cheat codes in a video game. Ever since the start of the sorcerers, there's been a Sorcerer Supreme, position that I take up now. The Sorcerer Supreme follows many functions, but mainly being the leader against magical threats, being the strongest sorcerer, and guarding the Eye of Agamotto, named after the first Sorcerer Supreme, which houses the Time Stone. When Hera got the Space Stone, it altered the Sanctum Sanctorum of the city, and we spent 3 weeks formulating a plan. Though some parts of the plan need to be reworked due to the different stones that Hera has gotten along the way. She's on a mission to collect them all, and regardless of the purpose, all of the stones brought together will make her a god, able to do anything, and we cannot allow that. Holy shit, Riley and Alex both say in unison. Where's the other stone we came to find anyway? Willow asked. The center of this planet, Strange responded. Wait, so if we lose, we get launched into space? Riley said. No, Strange began. If we do lose for any reason, the planet won't explode or anything. I made sure, because even if one hero is permanently lost, we will lose this battle. Riley and Eris' spider senses go off, with Willow's going off a second after. Eris teleports into frame and then says, oh great, more of Earth's mightiest heroes getting in my way. Fantastic. Yeah, and exactly what are we getting in the way of? What's your goal with the stones? Iron Man asked as Hera laughed. Fine, we have all the time, don't we? Especially with the sorcerer at your side. I'll figuratively set the stage. My name is Hera, of the planet Titan. I am the last member of my species. You may wonder why. The answer is because I killed them all. Their pain amused me, and so I did it. My plan is to turn all other sentient life into mere dust, and then laugh as they all grab for each other and cry as they all despair. The hero stood still, and Dr. Strange said, that's enough talking, give up. Hera laughed and said, oh my, am I outnumbered? Oh, it seems so. Unless, Hera used the Mind Stone on Riley, and he began to attack Dr. Strange. Hera began to use the Space Stone to rip apart the land nearby, and Iron Man and Alex went over to attack her to stop her from getting the Reality Stone. Willow and Strange did their best to stop Riley without hurting him, as Alex swings around Hera and Iron Man blasts her from the air. Eventually, though, Hera uses the Space Stone to throw Iron Man into Strange, and the Mind Stone to upset the symbiote and neutralize Alex via a Spider Sense overload. Riley went over to fight Hera as she used a Soul Stone on him, but his body, due to Spider Sense, webbed away from her. Hera gets to the Reality Stone and uses it to pull Alex over to her and begins to choke the passed out hero. Give me the Time Stone or I cut this clock short. She began to laugh as Iron Man gave Strange a near-death stare. Strange sighed and gave over the Time Stone to Hera as she threw Alex over and told the Avengers to say their goodbyes as Riley and Alex woke up. Strange opened a portal and told Iron Man to help Riley and Alex back to health, while him and Willow went to Wakanda. As the captains and Thors entered T'Challa's palace and explained that they needed help with a threat, Doctor Strange and Willow also came into the room through a portal and gave the other group a quick rundown of Hera's plan to kill all of reality and how she was coming now. As they said that, they heard screams from outside, and they all knew that Hera was there. The captains, Thors, and Willow are told to go outside by Strange, as Strange tells T'Challa to bring him to any kind of large energy source. You see, sometime after the second Spider-Man, Mr. Stark gave the Power Stone to Grace because, basically, he figured that Grace could find somewhere to put it, and Grace is probably the most trustworthy person that he knows. Grace, of course, took it to the most trustworthy person that she knows, that, of course, it would be very hard to get to, being in Wakanda with T'Challa, and so that's why it's in Wakanda. Anyway, T'Challa then brings Doctor Strange to the Power Stone. Grace goes down first and starts attacking Hera, who's using only the Reality Stone to make Grace float upward before getting hit in the face by Mjolnir. Abby then hits Hera repeatedly with the hammer before Hera uses the Space Stone to throw Abby into a wall, and the Time Stone to do to her again and again and again before Hera is hit by Zack's lightning through Kenzie's blades, and the two begin striking and stabbing at her. Kenzie is thrown into Abby, and both of their time is reversed so that they are space thrown into Zack. Willow then webs over to Hera and Venom blasts Hera while Grace falls down and strikes Hera with her shield. Hera uses the Mind Stone to have Grace attack Willow and walks over towards the capital, as Zack and Abby fly over and hit her with their weapons before moving out of the way so Kenzie can stab Hera in the back. Hera lets out a large scream before using the Time Stone on her back and the Reality Stone to turn Zack and Abby into frogs before mind-controlling Kenzie to beat Grace's ass. While getting her ass beat, Grace regains consciousness and Willow comes over and webs up the hole Hera was trying to follow Strange and T'Challa through. Hera throws Willow across the battlefield as Willow laughs, and Hera turns around wondering what Willow was laughing at as she is nearly stepped on by a giant Seven. Hera then uses the Time Stone to free Seven for a short time and moves out of the way before Seven resumes. Seven then turns into their fire form and starts blasting fire at Hera, distracting her as T'Challa comes slashing out of the cave and slashes at Hera with the power of a Power Stone enhanced version of his own vibrating powers. Hera then laughs and pauses the time of everyone. She, still bleeding out from T'Challa's attack, walks over to him in stop time and hits him in the gut before time resumes. T'Challa flies and drops the stone in front of Hera. Doctor Strange flies over towards Hera, but it's too late, and Hera, revitalized now, but still bleeding due to all the stones bringing her back together, and she knocks Strange back with the Power Stone. Hera then laughs and says, "Originally, I came to end all life, but this fight has put a smile on my face. Let some of you live. I'll snap my fingers and half of all the life in the universe will be obliterated, and I'll come back in years to finish off the rest of you that I'm making sure stay alive. Have fun watching all you love die." Everyone looks on in pure horror as Hera's chuckles of pure agony and evil fill the cave. The energy of the stones rippling through her body into the surrounding area with such force as though everyone can only barely hang on to the ground that they're standing on. And as Hera's laugh subsides, everyone watches in pure horror as she simply... We flash back to nowhere where everyone is sitting and talking about how they hope the battle on Earth is going when Riley's spider sense goes off. "Wait," he said, as his hand turns to dust and begins to flow away. He starts to freak out as Alex and Iron Man try to comfort him as he dies, but right as Riley finishes fading, we see Alex's senses go off too, and she looks at Iron Man. "Mr. Stark?"
Hey, it's gonna be okay.
"Mr. Stark, I don't want to go. Mr. Stark, please."
Listen, it's okay. It's all gonna be okay, alright? It should have been better. I'm sorry. I'll stop her, okay?
"Mr. Stark?"
I promise.
And she fades away in his arms. Back on Earth, Willow holds Seven, who is fading to dust, in their arms. Willow is gently shaking whatever isn't disappearing. Willow begs in a small voice with tears as Seven makes one last motion before turning completely to dust. Seven reaches into his pocket and pulls out a black box before opening and revealing a ring inside. And Willow cries for several reasons as Seven turns to dust. Zack looks around at the hellscape in Wakanda that was caused by Hera and turns around to see Abby turning to dust. He walks over to her and grabs her as she begins to fall, and he tells her that it'll be okay. And as she turns to dust, the two say, "I love you," and Zack's blood starts to boil. He holds Stormbreaker in his left hand and summons Mjolnir to his right, and he throws the hammer at Hera and slices at her with his axe, to which Hera dodges all of the crying Asgardians' attacks, until Zack slices her in the head, right into the Mind Stone, at which point she screams in agony and teleports away, with the stones being transported all across the universe, with only 3 remaining on the battlefield, as the universe wept in agony. The next film would be titled World Order and would take place a few months after the events of End of the World. World Order would be less about a big bad, although of course there would be one, but it would be more so about the idea of different character arcs, right? How do these people change because of the friggin' snap that took away all their loved ones? For example, during the entirety of the 5 years, although it wouldn't show the entirety of the 5 years, but at least at this point in time, it's inferred that Grace does keep doing this. Grace keeps trying to find the stones in space, funded by Stark Industries, and trying to get the stones. But Grace also abandons her darker blue suit for a newer one because she and the other Avengers have taken a stance against the government. And now that the entire Avengers are against them, and half of all of their evil government people are gone, it's a lot easier for the Avengers to take them down and get them out of power. Because simply speaking, a lot of the people being elected into power aren't part of that in-group of evil people. And so about the entire first year is mainly spent by them trying to get rid of the government threat, and they manage to mostly do that by the point to where the government can then fix itself during the remaining few years. Then of course, as Grace would like to continue, she keeps trying to find the stones in space, often going with other heroes such as Willow or Thor. But eventually they stop getting funding from Stark Industries as around year 3 of the post-snap, Douglas Stark starts getting doubts that they're going to be able to even find all the stones, and even if they do get most of them, that Hera will just come back and take them right away. He's also been getting closer and closer with his secretary, Pepper Potts, and the two of them have had a budding relationship for multiple years and are deciding to at least get married at some point in the future and eventually settle down, and maybe even he would stop being Iron Man. Of course, he's not settled on this thought, but he's considering it because he doesn't think there's anything he can really do anymore. Due to both losing many loved ones and friends during the snap, but also due to taking down the government of which they were so aligned with, Willow is now very distant for the first few years, and eventually by year 4, Willow has completely ceased contact with people like Grace or the rest of the Avengers, and Willow's still doing things, but not nearly as public as before. Zack actually takes a different approach with things, and during the first few years, 2 to 3 anyway, he feels very distant. He's not as communicative, but over time does become more so, and eventually is the only one to really help Grace as the years go by, after Stark Industries stop funding and when Willow falls right off the map. T'Challa is still around, and over the years has helped by, once Stark stepped down, helping fund the Infinity Stone expeditions, and also helping to dismantle the government, of course only through funding, because he doesn't want to start a war between his country and America, pretty much. For Grace, it just feels like she got her sister back, and that her life was finally starting to feel normal in a way, which it hadn't felt in a long time. But after all these years, at least from her perspective, she feels alone again. The few new friends she had made feel distant and off now. And as the years go by, she keeps track of when Hera will return in anticipation for what seems like it would be the end. Doctor Strange is also still kicking, although he's very busy and never had much of a relationship with the Avengers to begin with, but he still talks to them. He still makes sure that people like Grace are doing okay, because he knows that in a few years, the world may need them again. He knows he will. And similarly to End of the World, there would be no post-credit scene, but it would lead directly into the next film, being titled Avengers Save the World. The scene opens on Grace on the helicarrier looking for Willow, who's been MIA for years. Alarms then go off in the helicarrier, and Grace jumps from the helicarrier into the city to find Electro terrorizing citizens. Electro then uses the fact that Grace is made of mostly material that is conductive and goes right on through her and escapes. Grace sounds defeated and she's clearly pained. Grace gets an update from Nick Fury, who has been recently reinstated as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. after everything prior, and then finds out that Taskmaster is breaking into Stark Industries' R&D lab and that she needs to go and stop the break-in. Grace then runs over to the tower and is stopped by Friday, the new desk assistant at the tower, and has trouble entering until they hear a large explosion from underground and feel a large shake. Grace then simply runs past and rushes underground, seeing Taskmaster. The two then begin to fight, and Taskmaster wins due to his superior combat skill and pins Grace to the ground. Taskmaster then explains how Stark Industries has been working on ways to make the raft safer, mainly by trying to develop a way to remove villains' powers in the first place. Though due to spying on Stark Industries' R&D lab for a long time, he's realized that the gaseous form and the liquid form of the drug have two very distinct effects. The gaseous form of the drug temporarily disabling all of the powers of an individual, though temporary is a loose term, and the liquid version being able to directly transport powers outright, permanently removing a power by taking it out and giving it to another individual. And of course, that is the goal of whoever he's working for, to use it to take as many powers as possible and become a god. He then thanks Grace for being his first test subject and puts the serum into a special glove that he's wearing, and his hand approaches Grace. Before the glove is able to steal Grace's powers, however, Willow pounds Taskmaster to the ground, exiting invisibility, which she was in before, and knocks him out with her venom blast. Grace goes up to Willow and starts asking where they've been before Willow pushes past Grace and stops as Douglas Stark enters the room. You two have made quite the mess down here. There's a reason I didn't want you coming back. Now leave. Grace starts to argue with Dougie, but Willow just goes up the elevator. Grace argues that after the snap they made so much progress getting the stones, and the Power Stone was found and returned to Wakanda, and the Mind Soul Stones were found and then stored somewhere in the Stark facility. Then suddenly, Douglas lost all hope within the past few years. Dougie explains that he got in a relationship with Pepper, and they'd gotten married. They were planning on starting a family, and that he's got iron drones ready for any invasions or crime. Grace then retorts, "What about your old family?" As Grace said this, she immediately felt a tang of regret and just walked out of the building without any response. By the time Grace is headed home, the sky is dark, and Willow appears on her wall and says, "You know there's no hope, right? You searched for the stones for a long time, and only found 3. And hell, that's because they were close to Earth anyway. But it helped Stark actually want to be a part of it, and you could use his space program." Grace then responded, "And it didn't help that you disappeared a while after we started. We could have used you, but you didn't even want to be found, and tried not to be." Grace then finished, and Willow angrily retorted, "You don't know anything." Grace then turned to Willow and said, "If I could guarantee I knew where all the stones were, what would you do?" Grace then scoffed and said, "Fine, then I'd join you. but there's no way you could know. Grace then activated the hologram. Stark has the mind and soul stones. You knew that, of course. You also know the power stone has been returned to Wakanda. Then, a little trickier, I recently found out from Doctor Strange that he once again had the time stone in his possession. And early on, Stark and I did some crunches and some numbers, and we realized that it was likely Hera would already have the space stone by now, as she did use it to teleport away. It couldn't have gone far from her by the time she teleported anyway, and scan of universal energy confirmed that it didn't go far from her location, and that it was used a few days after and presumably where she would have found it. Later on, by myself, I used Stark resources right before the disbanding, and on a universal scale, I discovered that the stones all went the exact same distances apart from the center of where Hera traveled to. The only one unaccounted for was reality, which if the math is correct would be on a planet far in space known as Zenla. Willow then stood in astonishment. Wait, so we could actually... Grace nodded and said, of course, but we'd actually need to get reality and make a deal with Stark, T'Challa, and Strange for their stones. We could get all but one and then find Hera and take the space stone from her. Willow sighed and said, fine, I guess you won the deal. Get everyone else together, and I'll be waiting at Stark Tower, Captain. Grace then went to bed and the next morning put on her suit before heading to Asgard. She doesn't have too much trouble getting through to the castle, but does have a hard time finding Zack once entered, as he rarely leaves his castle, and if he does, it's to save someone from a criminal. Grace walks through and tries to find Zack, and eventually has an idea. Grace takes off her suit and goes to the roof of the castle. She jumps off and nearly hits the ground and says, shit, this is gonna hurt, as Zack catches her and puts her back atop the building. Grace, what are you doing jumping off my castle? He says. Well, I couldn't find you and want to get your attention. Listen, we have... Zack then interrupted, dude, we have a bell. It's right by the door. I will show you right now. Grace says, no, that's fine. Okay, we're going. As Zack flies her down to the doorbell and points out the obvious doorbell and rings it, and revealing it's as loud as fucking thunder. Anyway, Grace starts, we have a new plan. Zack then looks off as Grace tells him, you just have to try it, Zack. Nobody else could survive the snap, and very few others could help us get to space. Zack sighs and says, I'll go to the tower in 3 days, have everything ready by then, or I won't help. I can't have hope again, at least not the meaningless kind. Grace then looked to him and said, one last thing. We'll assemble 5 of them, and Hera will come to Earth and bring us the last. Assume your dibs would still stand, as she left Asgard, and went to Wakanda. Grace entered Wakanda, welcomed by T'Challa, and Grace explains her plan to him. He tells her that if she can successfully get the Reality Stone and bring the 4 other together, he would bring the Power Stone to the city to draw Hera to enter Earth via the Infinity Energy. Grace thanks her friend, telling him to come to Stark Tower in 2 days, and heads to the Sanctum to try to convince Strange. Grace stands to the front of the Sanctum as Strange appears behind her and says, I know your plan. Finish Stark and I'll come. Before disappearing as Grace says, okay, and heads towards Stark Tower. The scene starts before Grace even gets to Stark Island, with Douglas walking along the street before walking downstairs and going through his Hall of Armors. He goes to the Unibeam symbol at the top and motions towards it before hearing Grace enter and asks, what do you want? To finish what we started and fix things. Avenge them even. Stark says, I don't care how many you have and how many you'll find. I'm not part of that life anymore. You know my friend died and wouldn't let me save him. He told me to save his son. Couldn't save him either. I researched him and bam, he's dust. Grace says, at least give me the stones you have and we can do it ourselves. She'll come back eventually, and at the very least we can use the stones to stop her from doing it all again. Stark then says, fine, I'll send them over to the main tower for you and you can pick them up tomorrow. Now leave. Grace starts to leave, but right before leaving says, we both know you won't be able to stop forever, whether it's now or later. We'll be using your network in the city, and we don't mind. Grace then leaves and Stark heads to bed before having a dream of memories with the Avengers in the past, ending with the clip from the Venom movie where he starts working with Venom. Willow, Strange, Zack, T'Challa, and Grace all stand atop the tower as Strange opens a portal, which Zack walks through. The others can't go as they don't want to risk all of the stones being in one place where nobody could back them up. Each remaining member of the team has one of the stones. T'Challa has power, Strange has time, Willow has soul, and Grace has mind. They send Zack to get the stone in there, as he is the strongest. Willow asks why Zack doesn't have a hammer, and Zack says that he's chosen not to carry any of them until he earns back his honor. Strange then opens a portal, and Zack goes through and sees the Reality Stone and runs to it. He is then promptly bitch-slapped by Hera, who says, I've been living on this planet for years, waiting for you heroes to come looking for this stone, and right as I expected. I knew you'd come looking for the stone, so I simply collected this. Hera then picks up Thor and throws him across the planet. My personal favorite, and started waiting. They'll come to get you and bring the stones right to me. We flash back to Earth as the group is scared Thor hasn't responded yet, and Grace tells Strange to open a portal and let her go save Thor. As she's about to hop through the portal, the Hulkbuster Mark II lands on the tower and goes through the portal as Stark says, I don't want to hear it. And Grace steps back and smiles as Stark goes through to Zenla, and Stark rocks Hera in the face before she hits Thor again, and then Stark says, "I've been waiting to do this for nearly 5 years," as shoulder blasters come out of the Hulkbuster and blast Hera into the stratosphere. Stark throws Zach back through the portal and flies up and hits Hera in the face. He's about to attack Hera again as Grace yells for him to come back. Stark reluctantly goes to the portal and it closes behind him. Stark then says, "You're going to need something to house the stones. You can't just hold them all in one hand and snap with the other. You can brief me on the rest of your plan in R&D while I work on something to house them." The scene then cuts to R&D and Stark says, "So we're gonna trap her in the mirror dimension and try to beat her ass, as Willow somehow manages to invisibly steal the space stone, and Strange closes this dimension and we get all the stones to Thor, who will somehow have the time to snap half of all life back into reality. And then we do what exactly?" Grace then says, "We stop Hera from getting the stones," to which Stark says, "That plan is insane and insanely stupid, but it's all we have." The building then starts to shake as it's ripped apart by Hera's space stone. Strange activates the mirror dimension as everyone gets into fighting position, and Stark says, "I left the Hulkbuster on the roof." Thor then says, "Well, you only have one option. Run." Willow turns invisible as Thor, T'Challa, and Grace rush Hera, who simply teleports around them. T'Challa then hits Hera with a Power Stone vibranium punch right to the face, and Hera falls over before using the Space Stone to throw T'Challa over into Grace. Grace then jumps over T'Challa and throws her shield into Hera, who stops with the Space Stone, as Thor uses it as a lightning conduit and zaps Hera right in the face. Hera turns to teleport, but Willow webs over to the other Avengers, and with the Space Stone, Hera screams in anger as Stark runs over and gives Thor the dual nano gauntlets that are going to be used to house the stones. They put the stones in as Strange disables the pocket dimension. Thor is about to snap as Hera jumps into him and takes off the gauntlets, putting one on and using it to blast away the Avengers. Thor and Hera wrestle as Zach gets launched back. Zach then throws one gauntlet away. Hera chokes Zach, who sticks both of his arms out and has both Mjolnir and Stormbreaker summoned to his hands as he discombobulates Hera with them lightning charge. He grabs the gauntlet off of Hera and leaves Mjolnir on her, keeping her down as he goes and takes the other stones and...
That's it. Valhalla, give me your strength and power to become the true king and slay this beast.
Well, since nobody's using it.
By Odin's ghost. What is a king to a lizard?
What's a king to a god?
Face the power of Thor!
Hey, Mr. Stark, did you guys solve the problem, or did it, like, never happen or something? Well, I guess it had to happen, because...
Hey guys.
Alright team, listen up. I understand there's a lot of emotions floating around, but we can't let it get to us. We need to reassemble the stones away from Hera and have Thor snap her away for good. But bottom line, we can't let her get all the stones. Avengers, assemble.
After all this, we have quite a lot to talk about.
Hey.
You can't do this! I was meant to be! I am a god!
I am Iron Man.
You sure you gotta go?
I made a promise before all this happened, and now I can finally make right on that promise now that everyone is back. I really don't want to leave, but I know what I have to do. Goodbye, kiddo.
Goodbye, Mr. Stark. Iron Man had snapped away Hera and soon thereafter left after Shang-Chi. And of course, all of those who had been separated spent quite a long time reuniting. Many of the snapped had a hard time getting back into society, but many of them were able to with little to no effort. Doctor Strange resumed his position as Sorcerer Supreme, and Zack and Abby reigned Asgard, New Asgard anyway, as King and Queen once again. Grace and Kenzie, after all of their time apart, finally got to reunite. For good this time, and now they were in the process of getting Kenzie a new uniform, and Riley started submitting to colleges once again, and so the world did its best to return to normal as it could be anyway, in SUPER-SMP.